winter is coming, and winter is also coming for Ukraine, because earlier this month, just about less than a week ago, but this has been happening since October, Russia has been launching missile strikes, and those missiles have essentially taken out much of Ukraine's power system. And so this is a pretty intense situation going on. I wonder what your thoughts are today at this moment about it, and what you think people should be thinking about as this conflict continues forward.
Oh my gosh, there's so much, but something I've been talking about a lot lately, and that is the dynamics of power between the US and its vassals in Europe. One of the things that happened, I think, post World War II is there was an unspoken agreement in a way. And that was, the Soviet Union basically said, we're taking Eastern Europe, we're going to have this buffer zone, but they didn't have any pretense. They said, we're taking this, we're going to hold it as a buffer zone, it's ours. We're not going to pretend like they're independent sovereign states, they're part of the Soviet Union. Okay. The US empire then said, we're going to take Western Europe. However, we've got to pretend that they're independent sovereign states. So we're going to continue to give them the pretense. We're going to put bases. We're going to use them as we see fit. But we got to have the people thinking that they're independent and sovereign. And you can look at instance after instance that clearly demonstrates they're not. But now the U.S. empire feels threatened by the rise of Russia and China and Iran. And, the world is changing. Modernity, other countries, imagine that, are growing and looking out for their own economic interests. And some of them are having some success, particularly with other systems other than neoliberal capitalism. That's very problematic for the U.S. empire. So they can't afford the illusion of democracy anymore. So they're just like, okay, you know what we're going to have to do? We want to confront China, but we got to have industry, because all we've got is like magic asset-backed securities and stuff. What we'll do is we'll shut the tap off for Europe's cheap energy, and we'll steal all of their industry. Now, the job of the elite ruling class, vassal governors, whatever you want to call them, viceroys in Europe, their job, and they know it, is to maintain the illusion to the citizens of Europe that they're actually presidents and prime ministers, and they're actually in charge, and that they're independent sovereign nations. And now they're caught on this tightrope where they still have to try to pretend to their citizens like they represent them rather than the neocons in Washington, D.C., as the people in Washington, D.C. make it difficult for them, because they're like, come on, guys, you got to hand us a crumb or something like that. These people they're not buying into the game anymore. They figured this out. And Washington, D.C. is just like, we don't care. We're taking your industry. We're going to throw you to the dogs. We could care less. It's your problem. You understood this game going in. You're the elite ruling class, Macron, Schultz, Sunak, whoever the hell. Your job is to keep your mouth shut and deliver everything that we ask you. And you're doing that. And now if you got to deal with it, who cares? That's your problem. Ultimately, because the way the leaders in Europe see it is, hey, at the end of this thing, somewhere a few miles south of Miami, I get a villa in a gated community, and the people back in Europe will be, running around like some, Dawn of the Dead 3 or something. And so that's kind of where I'm watching the elite ruling class in Europe twist in the wind as they try to figure out. Now we're supposed to believe that they suddenly just now, they figured out that the U.S. is stealing all of their industry, selling them gas for 4 times the price that they really should, and forcing them to spend all of their money on weapons, and that they suddenly figured that out. They're smart people. They're not stupid. But now the problem is the people under them are looking at them, asking them questions, and now they have to pretend that they're barking back at the United States. And as winter comes, that pretense is going to get thinner and thinner.
It's very funny. You said what I just said, what I have been thinking. Macron, after a full year, actually after years of this, of the U.S. undermining them, the thing that makes most sense for Europe is to keep getting natural gas from Russia. That's the logical thing for them to do. But the U.S. has always stood in the way. So they knew this was coming. This was the year when it all came to a head. And now this week they want to pretend, oh my God, the U.S. wants to force us to buy fracked gas. We can't believe it. And it's a bad performance. But to your point, They have dug this hole for themselves. They have been. It's kind of like the mafia, in like the movie Goodfellas, where the big mobsters they were allegedly protecting businesses, and they just robbed them and then destroyed them. And that's where Europe is now. I mean, even after the U.S. blew up the pipeline, I mean, everybody knows. Who else would have done it? Who has been opposed to Nord Stream all of these years except the US? But they go along, they say, well, we can't reveal what we found. And if they ever reveal anything, they'll try to tell you that Russia blew up their own pipeline.
Right.
But this is quite a moment we're in. I don't know how much we want to go into it, but the creation of the EU is also responsible for this. These states have given up their sovereignty to this formation that was used basically to move capital around from one country to the next, and to move cheap labor from poorer European countries to wealthier European countries. But now it's all come to a head. But having given up their sovereignty, their people have given up their rights too. They are protesting. There are a lot of protests all over Europe. They're not they don't tell us about it, or they'll say what's a far right protest, as if to, deprive them of legitimacy. Not people saying, wait a minute, the energy prices have gone through the roof, people losing jobs, going out of business, all kinds of things. But it's funny, everything we were told about the Soviet Union may in fact be true about the US, that these little vassal countries don't dare speak out, don't dare stand up for themselves. And we are seeing the Biden administration bring all of these crises, all of these contradictions to a head, while simultaneously trying to start something with China. And we hear these opinion makers saying we can fight Russia and China at the same time. I mean, it's madness. It's absolute lunacy. But that's the state that Europe is in, and that people here in the US are in as well.
Well, the interesting thing I think about one of the things that we're learning about is both China and NATO, and that is, well, I mean, excuse me, both EU and NATO, the EU and NATO, and that is they're both American projects, and they're the exact same thing. The EU is an umbrella organization that the United States can bring all its vassals. It doesn't have to call them one at a time, bring them all together under this under this umbrella organization, and assume full control of their domestic and cultural policies. And NATO, they bring them all together and they assume full control for their foreign policy. So that's all it was. And I tell you, to me, what I think is the evidence of that: Brexit. The UK was like, yes, Brexit, all we got to do is get out from under the EU, and then because what were they looking for? The people kind of intuitively recognized that they didn't have sovereignty. Brexit was all about some true sovereignty. They got out from under Brexit, and they're even worse off than they were before. Because the issue was never about the EU. It wasn't about France. It wasn't about trade. It was about not sovereignty under the EU. It was about sovereignty under the US empire. So now that they're not under the EU, they're not under that collective umbrella organization that the US controls. The US now says, okay, well, we'll just keep our hand on you right here and keep you at our left hand, and yank on your chain anytime we want. And so now they're waking up to realize they have even less sovereignty than they did. At least when they were in the EU, they could hide, kind of like puppies, all like fish in the school. They all hide together. It's hard to eat them all. You can get one at a time. At least they could hide with the group. Now they're out there individually. They got Rishi Sunak, who is a embarrassing figure to me. Embarrassing. I look at him and I'm like, I mean, let's be honest. They're just keeping him there until they can find an Anglo-Saxon person to put in the seat. They're like, let's put this brown guy here.
Yeah.
We'll make it look good. Shut up and do what you're told. And then when we can find like an Anglo-Saxon person that we're comfortable with, we'll replace you. I mean, he was brought in a coup of sorts, over just an absolutely, bungling idiot. But at any rate, so that's where the EU is now. It's the issue there is sovereignty. And I think here's the interesting thing, and I wonder what you guys think about this. You've got these right-wing groups, these right-wing projects, like in Italy, Maloney or what have you, that are winning, right? and that if you look to the future, I would have to suspect that some of these are going to win. And people are saying, well, you can't let them win because that's fascism. Now, don't get me wrong, not a fan of them at all. But what they got now is fascism. It's a different kind of fascism. It's a different flavor of fascism, but clearly these neocons are fascists. These ultra liberals, you've got the ultra nationalists on the right versus the ultra liberals, but it's a different brand of fascism. It's more, I think what they're going to get is more of a non-interventionalist, a nationalist that says, we only want to deal with ourselves and forget it. We don't want to get involved. Like the traditional kind of conservative right-wing nationalists that are non-interventionalists, I think you'll see some. I'm not saying they're going to be good or I'm in favor of them. I'm just saying it's a different brand. And when someone says to me, I'm scared of them because they're fascists, I'm like, yeah, I'm looking up in the sky every night wondering if the missiles are going to come whistling down to take me out because of the fascists in here now. So, I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I can begin, and then Margaret, I'll kick it to you because the interviewee becomes the interviewer, and I like this. I like this. This is a good question. I mean, for me, you said it when you said the word brand. I think that is very important because it's quite obvious that regardless of how the establishment, the political establishment in Europe, in the United States frames itself, they end up doing very similar things. Now, one unique element of Europe is that there was fascism in Europe, and so there's kind of a unique history where it's like the Social Democrats, the neocons. There's kind of like this alliance of a brand that's an illusory democracy, and as that has crumbled, as there has been crisis after crisis after crisis, beginning with austerity, which the EU says, oh my gosh, I can't believe austerity now because of the United States and what they're doing with Ukraine. I mean, anyone who's been paying attention, anyone who lives in Europe, who's not of the elite, anyone who pays attention to politics in Europe knows that that's just not the case. The austerity has been happening for decades. Neoliberalism has been happening for decades. But now it's getting to the point where, yes, far right forces are getting stronger. And in my opinion, it's not so much about whether we support them or whether we don't, whether they take certain positions that are obviously correct versus ones that, of course, are just obviously problematic. The question is, well, what is the driving force of all of this? Why is this happening? Well, it's because the neocons, the social democrats, the liberals, they've smashed the left. They have done everything they can to destroy the left in Europe. And of course, we in the United States know what that is like all too well. And so that has allowed this kind of political vacuum to happen where, of course, far right forces are going to take advantage of that. And I don't think it's whether they're correct or not. Of course, when they have the same policies as the establishment and they start doing, enacting their agenda politically and economically, then of course we're going to oppose it. But at the same time, objective forces are objective forces, and the motion of history is going to remain this way unless we can actually begin to hold and critique and attack those forces that are allowing all of this to happen, and that those are the neoliberal elites, the ruling class, the ruling class proper. But I'll kick it to Margaret because I know that you probably have a lot to say too.
I appreciate what you said about the lack of a left in Europe. That is a huge problem. But that's not as you also said, that's not by accident either. It's been very deliberate. But I also think that we have to say, and Europeans need to understand, they're now having the experience that people in the rest of the world have always had. They're being treated the way people in the global South are treated. The U.S. and its friends will say that we're going to try to smash socialism in Venezuela, or we're going to sanction this country and starve people, or we're going to use proxies to undermine this government, or we're going to invade this place or interfere in that place. Now they are living through in a very obvious way what their governments have done around the world for decades. It's unfortunate that there's no left to explain this, and that the nature abhors a vacuum, and that's where the Maloney's come in, like the new Prime Minister of Italy, for example. But I don't think we should let the people of Europe off the hook either. I want them, I want everybody in the world to live in a nation that's sovereign and to be able to have the things they want for their people, but their governments have around the world kept other people from having their needs met. So I would point that out too, but unfortunately, without any left analysis to explain this, you get a Brexit, you get Maloney, and you get out and out support for fascists, like denial that Ukrainians who are running around, they always have a swastika tattoo or the Azov battalion. I mean, it's very open. And if you point out, look, there's a swastika, it's like, oh, that's Russian propaganda. It's like, no, it's like the millionth person I've seen with the swastika tattoo.
Margaret, if you put on Twitter, if you say Zelensky's name in any critical way like that, you will be reported. Like, that's how bad it is. Like, that's how much of a reaction there is.
I have been reported also, and I've been swarmed by the NATO people, and I think they also serve the purpose of just annoying people. So trying to prevent you from addressing certain issues. So you have a kind of fascism, but then you have this very obvious support for a fascist government, an undemocratic government that outlaws its opposition, that outlawed collective bargaining rights. And we're told the democratic thing to do is to give these forces billions of dollars, which, and we haven't talked about, I guess the Europeans are the canary in the coal mine, but we're the ones hurting too. That we cannot have, we're told we can't have any of the things we need, but the Ukrainian government, and I know people who, God bless them, they mean well, and they're like, oh, I want to give to Ukraine. And I tell them, if you pay taxes, you gave to Ukraine. There's nothing for you to give to. But we suffer as well. Are propagandized and don't even know it. So Russia never saw the day that its propaganda was as slick as what we're dealing with here. But I just wanted to point that out about Europe and its history and how it's treated people around the world.
Well, I would say this: you didn't give to Ukraine. Theoretically, your money passed through Ukraine on the way to the shell companies for the various billionaires in Europe that are really cashing in, FTX and those. That's obviously there's some miscreant activity afoot there, to say the least. You bring up a good point. I just thought about, Margaret, and it's very important, and that is the importance of who do you align with, right? And that is, here's the interesting thing. So what we heard was Viktor Orban is so far to the right that, the EU leaders they find him distasteful. He's a far right wing. He's a fanatic. He's a madman. He's a far right wing, right? But who are they aligned with? The same people who said Viktor Orban is so far to the right, he's distasteful. They don't even want to talk to him. He's unthinkable. Are aligned with people who are covered with swastika tattoos, who are yelling Sieg Heil, black sun, and every goose stepping all over creation, screaming as loud as they can when the U.S. empire says these aren't Nazis, and they're like, oh, shut up, yes we are. What are you talking about? Come on, give us our props. We're Nazis and we're proud, right? So what's interesting is looking at the people who are like, Orban's too far to the right. We can't align with him, but we can align with people who make him seem like, Fidel Castro for Che Guevara, for God's sake, compared to these people. And you look at the Orban right? And the Orban right has kind of aligned with a practical political, where they're like, look, we may not agree on a lot of stuff here. And I'm not defending Orban. I'm just trying to understand this, and you guys can comment on this. But we got to eat, and we got to stay warm. And so all this talk of Ukraine and Russia and who you're mad at and ideological stuff is all good and fine. But in my particular country, we're just trying to eat. We're trying to stay warm. We're trying to just make it another day. And we don't want to do these stupid ideological things you're doing. And if you ask me, I mean, I'm not trying to defend Orban. He's way to the right of me. I'm, way over here to the left. But my point being, looking at who these neoliberals align with, it's interesting to watch them argue that this guy right here to the right's too far and align with the most extreme version of fascism that this world has ever seen. People that are so proud of it that they have to lie, that they literally, the US government went in and they told the Azov people, you got to change your patch. I mean, this is a little too obvious. You got like all kinds of Nazi stuff on here, all the iconography of Hitler. Okay, you can't take your shirt off because you're covered with swastika tattoos, but at least, make your patch look presentable. And that's who they're comfortable with. Interesting things when you look at who's aligning with who.